Hello and welcome to episode 291 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm good. This is the first show we've recorded on the sofa.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as an audio medium, it doesn't really work. But trust me, Andy and I are sitting on the sofa in our new studio, which Lauren has beautifully built, constructed, put together the furniture in there. So we're going to probably we are going to start to release our podcast as a video format, clips of it. So you can see us doing the podcast each week. So do keep an eye on our socials. So it's quite exciting. And also the other exciting news is that we've got a new member of staff. I mentioned it briefly last week, but Laura has joined us. She's already been writing and doing a lot of work this week, so it's great to have her on board. So if you want to see Laura, see the book that we bought her, because every person who joins the Money to the Masses team gets a book that we pick for them. It's a bit of a thing that we do. I love reading. It's try and pick something personal. You can see on our Instagram feed which book we bought Laura.
Yeah, I think it's a really good, fun thing to do for new starters, and hopefully we'll be buying loads of new books in the coming months as we employ loads of people.
That would be nice. So we're going to get more and more books. So apart from that, it's been fantastic seeing the Facebook group this week, actually. I've been looking in the Facebook group a lot, our community. If you're not part of it, do join it. So this week, I'm actually going to do a piece that's inspired by a post that was in that group. And I haven't done that before. And I always think each week I should do a piece or pull some stuff from the Facebook group to encourage people to join, but also to show the value that's in there. So this week, one of the main pieces of the podcast has been inspired by one of the questions asked and the subsequent answers, which were very good. While
we're talking about the group, we may as well mention how to get to the group, because there are people here that think, I want to be involved. It's www.facebook.com. Why am I doing www?
I don't know,
it's not 1997.
I couldn't stop myself laughing when you did that.
We won't even cut that. Facebook.com/groups/money to the masses. Head over there. Don't go back to 97 and start typing in www. And you will find the group. Join that. We'll let you in and you can be part of the conversation. It'll be brilliant. Okay, so that's how you find the group. And this piece was inspired by the group. What is it we're talking about?
So the first piece is based around that Facebook question that's to do with taking your pension. So we're looking at Flexi Access Drawdown versus what they call UF Plus, which is the uncrystallised fund pension lump sum. It's basically a way of taking out chunks of your pension. And we've done a piece on the podcast before relating to drawdown, but this is a bit of a pros and cons piece. The second piece I want to look at is to do with savings. Now, NS&I, so the National Savings and Investments, have cut, or they're going to cut the rate on their savings accounts and also on premium bonds, and that's happening in November 2020. Now, the thing is, they were previously the best rate on the market, but by them cutting, people are going to have to shop around, and it's caused a bit of an uproar in the market. The savings market has basically come alive, but there is an easier way to shop around and find savings rates that I want to talk about, which are called savings platforms. And the last piece is you, Andy.
Yeah, I'm going to cover off just briefly. There's been a lot of information out there regarding electric vehicles, lots of chatter. There's been some research, some studies that have happened, and comparing electric vehicles, and are they really as good as they seem to be in terms of money savings? Obviously, they're great for the environment, there's a discussion on that, but that's for another day. But it's about whether they are worth the money and if you are going to make a true saving. So just a small piece on that, just to highlight a few of the facts. Okay, then, first piece on the podcast this week, UF Plus drawdown. What's it all about?
So when we talk about drawdown, if you have a defined contribution pension, that's what I'm talking about. So like most people will do, it's a pot of money, a pension that you're paying into, and you get a pot of money at the end that you do something with to provide a retirement income. Now, if you want to know the full details of what is called drawdown and the different options around it, go to podcast episode 271, because we did a great show that went into all of the nuances of it. And I say that because I listened to it again before the podcast
and
to make
brilliant.
It was brilliant. And I wanted to make sure that we didn't cover old ground, because this particular question in the Facebook group was touching upon some of it. So just to give a quick recap though, if you are going to retire, then there are a couple of options open to you if you've got what they call a defined contribution pension. One you're paying money into, that's just a pot of money that you get to retirement with. You could take the whole lot in one go, which pension freedoms allow that to occur. And of course, if you do that, take the whole lot, then generally speaking, a quarter of it is tax-free. The other 3/4 will be taxable at your marginal rate. So pretty much you don't really want to do that. It's going to be inefficient from a tax perspective. We're not going to touch upon the rules about small pension pots or anything like that. I'm assuming you're not buying an annuity here, by the way. The other option you could do is what is called the uncrystallised funds pension lump sum, which I'm going to call UF plus for the rest of this podcast. And it's the acronym UFPLS. UF plus. And what that is it now, if you think about your pension being a bit more of a bank account, you could go along and you draw out a lump from it. And 25% of that lump sum will typically be tax-free, while the remainder of the amount you take out will be taxable at your marginal rate.
And is that every time you draw it?
And that's every time you go along. And the reason this came about is because of the third option, which is the Flexi Access Drawdown, which is a mechanism where you can be much more flexible in the way you draw income from your pension. And not all pension providers allow that to happen. So the UF Plus version of allowing you to dip in and out of your pension pot was designed to allow more pension schemes to be able to give people some of the access to those freedoms that they wanted. So the drawdown version is what a lot of people might do is they get to their retirement age, they go, I want my 25% tax-free cash, we used to call it in the old days, but their pension commencement lump sum. They want to take that amount and then the rest of that pot is moved across the retirement line into what they call Flexi Access Drawdown. And then you can choose to take income from that or not. Okay. And that's the basic premise of the question that we had in the Facebook group. And I'm going to read the question out actually, because then you'll understand where this has come from. So I'll read the question out and the word for word. And it said, hope all is well. Please can someone enlighten me on the usage of converting my ISAs to a SIP in the years running up to retirement, i.e. 55-year-old person withdraws X amount of money from their ISA and then puts it into a SIP to get the basically going after tax relief. And they mentioned that they understand that they're only allowed to withdraw 25% per annum tax-free at the retirement age. They really want to know is this a good idea and really what happens when it comes to drawdown. So there was a whole range of answers that came to this and it was a really good thread, some really good stuff in there, which I want to touch upon because I think it's worth bringing to the attention of a wider audience and to encourage people, in fact, to join the community as well. But to give you a quick overview, the debate got very much into the taxation, what happens when you get to retirement. So if you park the ISA bit for a second, I'll come back to that later on. But I have a view on that. If you're going to dip into your pension and take out lump sums where you take the UF plus route, where you take 25% of that is tax-free cash and then you've got the rest that is taxable. Of course, what you could do is take that amount out, and if it's less than your personal allowance in total, you're going to not pay any tax on it. You can do a similar thing if you wanted to with Flexi Access Drawdown, if you want to take the income. But generally speaking, this person was talking about, well, if I just take the 25% up front, I just take 25% of my pot, then leave the rest over in the retirement side in drawdown. It didn't say whether they're going to take an income or not. Is that a good option? Now, there was an interesting debate that happened about the benefits of UF Plus versus Flexi Access Drawdown, because almost universally, in most instances, it seems like Flexi Access Drawdown is the better route than UF Plus. And the reason is because, as the name suggests, is the flexibility. You can decide to take all your tax-free cash up front. You can then decide to take an income or not. And you can vary things depending on your circumstance. And so people started to argue about the idea that, well, surely just taking all your tax-free cash up front that you could, 25% of your pot, doing whatever you want with that, and then deciding to take an income and invest the rest is the best option. But there was a debate in there about that if you actually went through and started to take lump sums via UF Plus, theoretically you could get more tax-free cash in pounds and pence. Okay. Now, just to explain that very briefly, because it seemed to get lost in the conversation thread, what the person was trying to explain was that if you had a 100 grand pension pot, to keep the numbers simple, and you take the 25 grand upfront pension commencement lump sum once you've got to retirement age, and you decide you want to use the Flexi Access Drawdown route, you've got your 25% tax-free cash. It's 25 grand. That is it. You're getting no more money tax-free out of that pension. It's going to be taxable any more money you draw in terms of income. The amount of tax you pay will depend, of course, on what your income tax situation is when you take it out.
Yeah.
So you can try and vary that so you don't have.
You can pay no tax at all on that over time if you're clever.
If you were paying, if the amount you were taking out was less than your personal allowances and you had no other income. So it is possible. People do it. But it is possible, theoretically, if you do the numbers, if you took out lots of small lump sums, so you took out the UF Plus route, so you had 25% of each bit you took out was tax-free and the other 75% was taxable. Over time, you can see as you're taking those chunks out, you're leaving tax-free cash in your pension, and it can grow over time, if that makes sense. So you're growing that pot. It won't stay at £100,000. You'd hope that it's going to keep growing by X amount over a period of time. So that means if you keep taking those small lump sums that are going to be what you need to survive on, so it's going to be enough, it's going to be enough income in total, then you could, in theory, after 20 years, and somebody produced an example and they crunched the numbers, and I actually replicated it. I'm sad like that. I went away and replicated it to see if the figures, work? Yeah, and the figures were roughly right. You could get to the point where after 20 years, in actual pounds and pence, you've had more tax-free money from your pension pot than the person who took the 25 grand up front.
Right.
Because you're allowing your pension pot to grow over time with that tax-free cash, because each instalment under UF Plus, every bit you take out, only a small part of that is tax-free cash. Most of your tax-free cash is still left in your pension. It's growing. The only problem with the debate was that it slightly falls down when you get to the point of looking at what you do with the tax-free cash on the other route. So if you took the flexi access drawdown route, the assumption in the example given was that tax-free cash didn't grow on its own. You didn't do anything with it.
Right.
Now, if you don't allow for growth, then it's true that tax-free amount is stuck at 25 grand. If you took that 25 grand...
kind of assuming you might just blow it or stick it in an account that has no interest earning on
exactly.
it. It's just gone.
Exactly.
It's done.
And so if you did something with it and that was growing, then theoretically your tax-free cash amount could grow as well. Now, there was obviously a big debate about why would you take money out of a pension and then put it into another investment that can incur charges and all sorts. So that's a separate debate. That's one of the things that you'd have to really think about, because what's the logic in doing it? But what it boils down to when you look at it, it can be tax efficient to use UF Plus, even though it really was a system that seemed to be created for people who didn't have access to Flexi Access Drawdown. And Flexi Access Drawdown has a lot of benefits. There can be instances where it could be more tax efficient to use that route. But that very much depends on, firstly, your tax position and what you do with that lump sum. Because, as I say, if you do something with it and you don't just do nothing with it and you earn some money on it, then that can grow too.
Yeah.
The other thing to bear in mind is that if you go down the UF Plus route, then it actually instigates the money purchase annual allowance. So what that is, if you go back to the previous podcast, 271, I explain it, but it means you can put in less money into your pension from that point onwards. Whereas if you went down the Flexi Access Drawdown route and just took all your tax-free cash up front and didn't take any income, then you could still be putting in money into a pension without this new lower limit coming in, because the money purchase annual allowance limit is much lower than the normal annual allowance. But I'm not going to go into detail here. Go back to the other podcast. So the message of the post was that when you get to retirement, it isn't just a one size fits all, because it's very dependent upon what you want to do with the money, your tax position, whether you want to buy an annuity, all these different things. And the spreadsheet can't give you the definitive answer. And in the question that we had, people were trying to give a definitive answer with a spreadsheet. And when I sat there and crunched the numbers, you soon work out there's a lot of moving parts that make it not possible to come to that definitive answer. And I want to give you another example where actually going down the Flexi Access Drawdown route and taking all your tax-free cash up front makes sense. So if you imagine there was somebody with a 200 grand pension pot, and this is an example given in an article that I'm going to link to in the show notes, which compares Flexi Access Drawdown to the UF Plus route, so people can see a very well-argued piece about which is best. If you imagine there was somebody who had a 200 grand pension pot, they would take 25% of that up front as that tax-free cash, that pension commencement lump sum. They were 40% taxpayer and they wanted 10 grand a year target income. Now, if they took that 50 grand pension commencement lump sum, that tax-free cash, and went, do you know what? I'm not taking any income from the rest of the pension pot, but I'm going to use that 50 grand to pay me 10 grand for the next 5 years. What that means is they wouldn't actually start drawing an income on their pension pot for another 5 years because they're getting that 10 grand a year that they need. And as a 40% taxpayer, that's pretty attractive. So they haven't got to get their pension pot to generate enough gross income, because it's going to be taxable, to give them that 10 grand a year income that they need. But if you imagine that the person had instead been drawing taxable income from their pension pot, as a 40% taxpayer, they'd need to take £16,000 or more than that a year to get down to 10 grand a year net. The point is, at the end of the whole exercise, after 5 years, they would have £38,335 less than if they'd taken their tax-free cash up front, lived off it for 5 years. And that's assuming there was not even any growth in the pension fund in those 5 years. That would be how they'd be better off. So the message becomes that there's definitely horses for courses. You need to look at the difference. It depends on what you do with the money when you take it out. Now, take advice is the big message. That generally speaking, for a lot of people, flexi access drawdown would be the better route. You can create examples where going down the AF Plus route is better, but for most people, it seems to be flexi access drawdown is the best route for them. But again, you've got to seek advice. Let's find out what would be best for you in your scenario. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that there were a few things that people didn't realize as well as part of this whole question. And it's just a throwaway thing that people didn't realize that your pension contributions are based upon certain rules. And it's about you put the maximum in of £40,000 a year for most people, or their earnings. So if you earn less than £40,000, you can only pay in up to the amount that you earn. And of course, for people who don't earn anything, you can put up in total £3,600 a year. That's the total amount you can put in allowing for tax relief. So the point is that it's based upon earned income. So you have to have the earnings that your allowance is based upon. But the money doesn't actually have to come from the earnings themselves. So if you're working, the money doesn't have to come out of your earnings from your job. If you happen to have the money sitting in your account that you want to pay into a pension, it can come from there. And it's a bit of a slightly pedantic thing, but the reason I find it interesting to highlight, because some people, when they're trying to fund their pensions in later years, will have money sitting there that they want to put into their pension, but they haven't earned enough in that year to be able to put that amount of money in, and they forget about that fact. Or they might just sit there and work out that they can actually put the money in because they have earned it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you can...
No, it's a really good point, I think, to make that distinction, because I didn't necessarily know that, and I'm sure there'll be other people that didn't know that as well.
Yeah, so it's based upon earned income. Now, before I finish this piece, I just want to go back to the ISA debate that was on there. And my view is that a bit of both is good when it comes to pensions and ISAs. And the reason I think that is because the tax rules on pensions are constantly changing. We talked about it the other week, which caused a bit of a stir about ages which you can access your pension is going to go up. And that will constantly change over time. And it's only going in probably one direction, which is upwards. So ISAs don't seem to be impacted in the same way in terms of rule changes. That's not to say they won't be, but they don't seem to be ever impacted as much. They're a much simpler product. For that reason, I favour having a bit of both. And also, it's not an either or. Yeah. So you don't have to have one or the other. And don't forget, ISAs are tax-free as well. So when you take the money out, when you put money in, you don't get tax relief. But when you take money out, you don't have to pay tax. I don't know why people find it attractive to move the money from their ISAs into their pension, and then they get the tax relief. But they only get that if, as I mentioned earlier, they've got earnings in that year that they do it. There's no good them sitting there thinking, oh, my earnings have dropped, I just want to bung it into my pension. They won't be able to. So it isn't a bad idea for people who start out to save via ISAs, and then if they find out they don't need the money, then ultimately move it into a pension to benefit from tax relief a bit later, but they have to have the earnings. So I'm of the view that I wouldn't necessarily rush to lock it away all into a pension. I think having a bit of both is always good, because I'm one of these people who champions flexibility over most things. So I like flexibility, the ability to be able to access money when you want and not have to worry about the taxation of it.
Okay, so next piece on the podcast, we're going to talk about savings platforms. We haven't covered it before on the podcast, and we're kind of discussing, we were thinking, well, why haven't we? Because it's, especially now with NS&I, it's a good time to start talking about it.
Yeah, so it's actually very topical because, as Andy said, NS&I cut their interest rates, or have announced they're going to. Which
is slightly annoying, because we did a podcast about 6 weeks ago saying how we don't like to date the podcast, but we did highlight them because they happened to be sort of market leading at the time.
And it's very unusual for them to be market leading. That's the point. And the reason they are is because of the whole coronavirus world. The government wants to raise money, and they became the market leader, particularly in easy access savings accounts. And that skewed things. And it meant that other banks had to offer better rates, or they weren't attracting any savers' money. And so what we saw is when NS&I announced they were going to cut the rate, they haven't actually cut theirs yet by the time we're making this podcast, but already all the other banks are cutting theirs. So Marcus, if anybody knows, have heard of Marcus, and again, this has had a bit of chatter within the community, they were one of the best rates out there. And it's rather annoying at the fact that they then decided to cut their rates, and they've gone from 1.05%, which is still nothing, but to 0.7% on an instant access savings account. So the message is always shop around. We know that. So you shop around, look for the best rates, particularly if you're in an instant access savings account, you can therefore move around without penalty, presumably. Use the Best Buy tables on our website. You can find them on the home screen if you go to Best Buys and Reviews. There's a drop down. You can find easy access. You can find fixed rate bonds, ISA accounts, everything on
Notice accounts, children's accounts, it's all there.
It's all there. Regular savings accounts. So go and have a look at those. But what makes it particularly interesting this week is that one of the best accounts at the moment is Coventry. So Coventry Building Society have got something called a double access saver account, which pays 1.1%. Now, the reason it's got a name double access is because you can only access your money twice a year without penalty. And the penalty is for the, like, say, the third time you wanted to access money is 50 days interest. So what it means is these sorts of accounts are great if you, for some reason, had money that you don't want regular access to. Maybe you've got some money for a tax bill or something that you want to access twice a year.
Do you think that's not by accident, the twice a year access? Do you think that's
do you
just
know
a
what?
happy coincidence?
Maybe it is a happy coincidence, but I suppose they think 6 monthly. If it's less than that, you might as well go for like a fixed rate bond.
Yeah.
So what made it particularly interesting, though, is not necessarily that account, but that account appeared on one of the savings platforms out there. So a savings platform is a platform, a website, whatever you want to call it, that enables you to register with them, but be able to open and have money in the savings account, but then move it between them. So people who had an NS&I account now, for example, or a Marcus account or whatever, they would have to go and go, right, I've got to go and find the next best rate. I've now got to go to that new bank, building society, open up an account with them. Then I've got to withdraw the money from my old account and move it across. With savings platforms, you register with them, then it
just
gives
one registration.
Registration usually, and then what it does, it gives you access to a wide range of banks, which you can then move your money between. And so they will have accounts that are normally, a lot of them are fixed term accounts, but they have some like Coventry Building Society's double access saver. Now, Hargreaves Lansdown's Active Savings is a savings platform. So they're an investment platform, so they can buy all your funds and stuff with them. But they also have this savings part because they want to attract people's money to save, because obviously the theory would be that people who invest probably have lots of savings, so bring that money over, but then they might end up moving it into investments. Now, they don't charge you a fee for having your money on their platform to save.
What's the catch then?
There are catches, but it's generally the pros and cons I'll come on to of savings platforms.
I'm jumping ahead, aren't I?
You're keen this weekend. So the point is that if you're fed up of all this keep happening, you could go and register with one of these savings accounts. Now, I'll give you the three of the big ones. There's Hargreaves Lansdown Active Savings, Octopus Cash and Raisin are some of the big ones. There's another one called Flagstone. There are others. And you can register with them, and then you can move your money between different accounts. So you can decide, I don't want it there with Coventry anymore, I'm going to go to so-and-so. And you can have it in a fixed term bond that will then mature, and that money comes back into your hub account within that platform. Mm-hmm. You can then move it to someone else, all at a click of a button. Mm-hmm. So it's technology meets savings. It's how it really should be. Now, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons, because the pros are obviously easy setup, possibly one login, less effort shopping around, and there are occasional exclusives on some of these platforms. Now, the downside is that you can actually get worse deals on them as well. Now, the reason that occurs is because some of the platforms like Hargreaves Lansdown don't charge fees. I've not mentioned some of the others who do charge fees. So some of the other platforms do charge fees for having your money, like it might be 0.3%. So you've got to be comfortable with the fact that you're paying for the ability to move money around, but you're paying to save, which doesn't quite sit great with me. But Hargreaves Lansdown don't charge, Raisin don't charge, and Octopus Cash don't charge for using their platform. But what it means is sometimes that charge that they would normally apply to consumers or other platforms do, they charge to the banks. So if they charge it to the banks or the building societies, it gets reflected in the fact you might get a worse or lower rate. You can end up having higher minimums on some of these. The money you put in, like you might have to have £1,000. You're not necessarily going to be able to put in a fiver. And the other big drawback really is that they're not whole of market. So they're not got everybody on there. It's not like if you go and look at the tables that we talked about on our website and you go and look at the best savings rates, you're going to definitely get the best saving rate. It just so happens why this piece then became very topical, made me think about talking about these savings platforms, is that every now and then the stars align and the best rate is on one of these platforms, and that's what's happening now with Hargreaves, and they've had a flood of money thanks to NS&I pulling their rate. The one thing you need to make sure of if you want to use them is that the financial services compensation scheme is working and is included. So where that really comes into its own is the hub account. So that sort of, you pay the money to the platform before it can end up where it's got to be. It's got to go somewhere. And people like Hargreaves Lansdown have Barclays as their bank that they will put the money in temporarily before it moves somewhere else, or when the money matures from somewhere else. It's got to go somewhere to be on the platform so you can use it. Now, that would mean in that instance it's going to be protected by the FSCS, like any other savings, because as long as it's in your name, it's going to be protected under the FSCS. Now, some of the platforms out there, that isn't the case, so you have to double check. But for the ones that I've got, Hargreaves Lansdown and many others, they are protected. And of course, your money goes to banks that will be covered under the FSCS rules. But you have to bear in mind that the rules still are applied in the same way as if you were to go to the banks yourself. So if you had more than £85,000 with a particular bank or building society, even through one of these savings platforms, then the bit above that won't be protected under the FSCS if it's a single account. So you still have to play within the rules, but it's just interesting because these savings platforms are now potentially going to be useful tools. Before, when we looked at them, the rates weren't that great. But now, in this sort of COVID world, NSAI pulling rates and everything, there's an attraction there because rates are falling and there's an attraction in using these. So go and have a look at them and let us know what you think about it.
Okay, so that moves us on to the last piece of the podcast, very short piece this, and it's talking about electric vehicles and are they as good value as people make them out to be?
Can I guess? Because I don't know what the answer is.
Okay.
No.
Well, unfortunately, the answer is kind of they are, but there's a few caveats. So we're still none the wiser, really. No idea why we chose this to go on the podcast. But there are some interesting stats and figures that have been produced, and I just thought I'd share them on the podcast for people who are weighing the option up and thinking, do you know what, I might be going down that route. I think even you and I have talked about going down that route.
I've definitely had at some point that I would replace my car. There's a part of me that wants to be green, and I think that would an electric car work, even if it's just for a local runaround? But you're going to tell me.
I quite like the idea of being able to, not that I'm a boy racer or anything, but just being able to put the pedal down and it's there. I don't need to hear the roar of an engine. I'm not a massive...
I quite like the idea of almost scaring people by suddenly appearing, yeah, like they do me when you go around the corner and you don't hear the electric car coming.
So there's been some research done by a company called LeasePlan, and every year they submit their research. And as the years go by, these electric vehicles seem to be able to go further. The price comes down slightly. And as technology improves, then hopefully these things should be better value. So apparently, according to the research, electric family cars are cheaper to own than petrol and diesel models. But there are some caveats and some bits and pieces we'll cover. So the reason they're cheaper is overall, they've worked out that there's lower maintenance and charging costs, and the approximate saving per family is about £130 per month. Okay, so they've done the figures, and over a 4-year period, based on, so you're buying a car over 4 years, so they're going to assume you've got a loan or you've got the money and you're paying it out per month, and you're doing 30,000 kilometres per year, and they work out the fuel, the maintenance, the mileage. And if you own a petrol car, that will cost you £969 a month based on the 4-year period. And if you own an electric vehicle, on average, you'll pay £837, according to the research. So where it doesn't work out so good is if you're buying a small electric vehicle. So Nissan Leafs, cars like this, they tend to be more expensive over that 4-year period. But that's again caveated by the fact that the trading costs for electric vehicles are much better. So because they're quite expensive to buy outright, actually, if you extend it to 5, 6, 7, 8 years, it starts becoming much cheaper because the sell-on value is better. And so, yeah, if you're going for a smaller car, you will make savings, but you're going to have to hold on to it for longer. Also, just as an extra bit about money saving, there's been some additional research done this week. It was good timing about how to save the most money if you've got an electric vehicle. What do you do? How do you choose your energy plans? And there's a bit of confusion out there because it's not easy to shop for your energy plans based on the fact that you've got an electric vehicle. So basically, if you've got an electric vehicle, you want to try and choose an energy plan that's cheaper overnight, because most people will come home after work,
see what you mean,
plug in their vehicle. And if you've got one of these economy 7 plans, they used to be called, I think, where it's cheaper overnight. But when you do the search online, it's very difficult to pinpoint the plans that, there's no green light that says this is an electric vehicle. But there is a company called Right Charge who've entered into the market, and they're a comparison service that's based specifically for the owners of electric vehicles. And they help owners find the best tariffs, and they also help to facilitate home charging costs. So if you're going to buy a new electric vehicle, apparently if you contact these guys, they will actually get you money off getting when you buy one, you've got to have a little port put on your house when you can plug it in. So the costs of that are actually reduced if you go through this company as well. So it's estimated that 10 million people will switch to an electric car in the next 10 years. And based on research, they reckon they can save those 10 million people £10 billion on home charging.
I just think if you went to visit friends and family and just said, can I stay the night? And then just secretly plug your car in. You could charge your car for free. That's the one thing I've never quite worked out, is what happens when you go longer distance. And I mean, I think that's interesting research actually about the difference between the larger cars and smaller cars. And I still think we're at the point where to be green, to be environmentally friendly, costs. So I'm talking about if you want to go and buy products that are environmentally friendly without any packaging, or you want to go and buy things that you go, for example, to individual shops rather than the supermarket, bits and pieces like that. To be greener and be able to buy things without all of the environmentally bad things that are going on tends to mean you've got to pay more money for it. And I think that almost sums that up as well. The fact that you've got to do all that work and then you still don't know whether you're actually, yes, you're greener, you're helping the environment, but are you better off? But you're not financially better off. And you almost got to be accepting of the fact that if you're going down that road, you can afford to go down that road.
Exactly right. I probably should finish off with the extra couple of benefits to having an electric vehicle. Of course, there's no car tax. That is another little bonus that you'll save money. This has been factored into the research, but it's just a couple of points to bring out. If you're in London, there's no congestion charge. You'll often get parking incentives where you can either park for free or you get discounts. And actually, the government have a low emissions grant, which is up to £3,000 will be passed on to you when you buy one. It's actually paid to the dealership and then they pass it on to you, which sounds a bit dodgy to me.
Yeah, I'd never trust a car dealer. I mean, I apologise to anyone who's a car dealer who listens to the pod. They know. But they know. Every time I've been to a car dealer, it's almost you leave feeling like you've been completely flipped.
They must have so many managers. Every time I've been into a car dealership, you can't get a decision from the guy you're speaking to because he's got to speak to his manager. And then suddenly he's got to speak to his manager who's not here and they've got to get on the phone.
Do you know what? I've got an opposite theory. I don't think there's any managers. I think there was an empty room that the guy goes, I've got to go and speak to my manager.
Makes a cup of tea.
He goes in there, walks around the desk a couple of times, rings his wife, makes a cup of tea.
I've got a sucker on there.
Yeah, do you reckon that's long enough? Comes out, well, Mr. Leeds. And then that's what I believe does happen because I think it's happened to me.
Apologies to car dealer owners and people who work in that industry. I'm sure it's not all like that. But right, that's it. We're done for this week.
We are done.
So if you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with number 2. Of course, we mentioned the Facebook group earlier. It is facebook.com/groups/moneytothemasses. And we're on Instagram as well. And do leave us a review on this podcast. This will be up on YouTube as well. So you can comment, like, and subscribe on YouTube. That's the first time I've done that because we've been filming it.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't let.
It probably won't be on YouTube now. I know you said it, but we will be putting them on YouTube in the future. So do leave us a review. It's great to see the reviews. It helps us. It encourages us to keep putting the podcast out. And I want to mention it again. We're soon going to be doing a property live event. So if you've got any property questions you want answered about anything to do with the state of the market, whether it's about mortgages, lending, affordability, buying and selling a house, what estate agents are seeing, then do write in to the addresses that Andy just mentioned and we'll ask your questions live on that show, which will go on, I think, via Facebook.
Yeah, we've got some great guests on that. I'm really looking forward to that. So that's it. We're done for this week. Until next time.